everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and online role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another Roll20 review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the marketplace section of online role-playing website Roll20.net. With this video, we're going to be taking a look at the 5th module for the War for the Crown Pathfinder Adventure Path, titled The Reaper's Right Hand. Review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. Switch on over. There I am. Hello. So this module is designed for players of 13th level who have obviously completed the adventure path up until now. And at this point, adventurers really have to start ramping up the scope and the challenge and the stakes of whatever they're doing, because players are getting very, very powerful player characters. And I think this one does a really good job of that by essentially transporting everyone to access the plane of law and forcing them to track down, as you can see on the right hand of the screen here, the original Emperor of Taldor, Taldaris, who has been captured. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's start off with what we get included in the Reaper's Right Hand for $24.99, and is of course added to your regular War for the Crown adventure. As you can see here, when I open it up, I've got all the ones included in here automatically. I just haven't been archiving them, but it's all one big campaign, as you can see right there. Alright, so with this one, you get 4 5-foot battle maps with dynamic lighting for Roll20 subscribers. We can see them right here. We also get 1 non-gridded city map. So yes, there is another city here. This is pretty much the main theme of every single module with this adventure path, is it's going to take place in and around a big urban environment. This one is no different. However, this one is a lot more interesting because of where that city is located. But you do get that map of Sayashto. No idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It also includes 37 unique named NPC character sheets with matching tokens and GM descriptions, 23 of which have pictures and handouts, 54 NPC monster sheets with draggable tokens, vision, and separate player handouts, 77 magic item player handouts, only 13 of which have pictures, which is kind of disappointing. And then kind of the standard, you get the token page that's alphabetized. It has all the various tokens on there, although you can drag and drop them from this menu as well. That's just a way for you to copy paste. You want to do it that way. The journal area is organized into 3 parts, which is, I think, also pretty common for all the modules of this campaign. It's all kind of an 3-act structure. You do get extra notes and lore on Sayashto, the city, as well as Thamir Gix, who I believe represents the antagonistic organization, the Silent Blade, as well as the Noble Lines of Taldor, which I'm not sure where exactly that comes up, but I guess it's just extra kind of detailed information to know for purposes of this campaign. I really like this module a lot. I think it does a good job of giving the players that Stranger in Strange Land kind of vibe. It also has some really cool dungeon crawls, which I feel like has been very much lacking in this entire campaign, because it's been very centered on this kind of political upheaval, and you're working in this urban environment. So you're kind of going like to different mini places. You might go to like a warehouse or somebody's mansion, and those are fine, and a lot of them turn into mini dungeons. But I love just meaty death trap dungeon crawls. Not necessarily death trap, but like a cool like underground dungeon. And this one has 2 of them, bookending. There's one in part 1, and basically part 1 is a dungeon and part 3 is a dungeon, and they're both really cool big dungeons. We're going to get to that, but that's a huge plus for this one. And I think part 2 is fun because it literally takes place all within this city in the plane of law. So to start us off, at the end of the last module, the villain, Maxilar Pathurius, I believe his name is, he had uncovered a big truth bomb, and that was at the Stavians, which your player characters are working for Princess Eutropia, and the Grand Prince was the one that kind of set this whole thing in motion with the Civil War. He got assassinated. Well, it turns out he was. I'm not going to recap the whole thing, but anyway, the important information here is that the villain from the last module, and really the whole campaign up till then, had uncovered the fact that the Stavians actually don't have a good claim to the throne like they thought they did, that your, I don't as you call your client, the person you're working for, Princess Eutropia, thought she had a good claim. Turns out it's not, but they have one solution, and that is to go to this long lost, forgotten tomb of whatever it's called, the tomb of the tomb of the first emperor. So it's Taldaris's like original resting place, tomb that he had, which has no longer been used for a while. But this place has a magical relic, not quite a MacGuffin because it actually does play into the campaign a little bit, and you get this item eventually. But it can essentially verify and appoint people as official rulers of the country. So that's all right. That's an easy solution we can use. So your mission at the beginning of this module is you send your players to find this tome, which is a little mini role-playing investigation scenario for part 1. You have to go out into this town and actually do various like tasks, and there's a whole big which one is that one? I think it's right here, of land graves and land grabs. Try saying that too many times. I don't think so. So there's a lot of these persona phases where you get to do all these skill checks, and I like the way the campaign does allow for a lot of these scenarios. And this one's actually more combat heavy than most, so this is kind of nice to have this moment. There's no actual maps or visual aids for this, but there's no battle either, so it's kind of okay. But essentially your solution is just to find the entrance to this tomb. You do, and it is an awesome dungeon that we are going to switch to. Tomb of the First Emperor, as you can see here, and everything is in dynamic lighting, as we can see there. And it's just a really cool, like, you know, mostly buried, forgotten tomb that has a lot of like celestial and mechanical guardians, because it's a, you know, it's not an evil tomb, it's the kind of righteous ruler of this kingdom, but he still wanted it to be guarded, and they eventually like deified him, so it kind of turned into its own religion. So there's all these kind of mechanical guardians here. There's a Clockwork Angel. Let's see if we can pull this one up. There we go. Which looks really cool and acts as like one of those animatronic things that like points to all the murals on the wall, and then after it's done doing that, then its defensive programming takes over. It takes out a sword and just starts attacking the players. But I like this dungeon because they have to learn how to perform this ritual when they get to the final room, essentially. So they actually have to pay attention to what the murals are and roll like skill checks, investigation checks, arcana checks in order to glean like, okay, what ingredients do we need and what things do we have to do to perform this ritual correctly, which I think it's one of those things at the end where it's like how well you do determines on like how good of a bonus you get and those kind of things. Or you could, I guess, fail completely, but it's some really neat things happening here. There's a bunch of guards. This gold golem animates only after the players start fucking with stuff or stealing things, which you should never steal from a righteous emperor's tomb. These celestial lions down here. Let's see if I can pull those guys up. I'm just shift clicking because it's easier, but all this stuff's obviously on the left. They're called like Foo Lions or something, but they'll actually talk to the players. They have two very distinct personalities, and they'll kind of figure out like, hey, what are you doing down here? Which I like that a lot. There's various traps that are neat. This one has like a reverse gravity field and the starry sky that animates. It becomes like fiery suns, and it shoves the players up into there. That's good stuff. It's just a cool little dungeon crawl. Just designed to be a death trap dungeon for the players to get through. And then at the end, they perform the ritual. They meet a Valkyrie, which was a former like general under Taldaris, which is a cool character that they're supposed to pretty much ally with, although there's notes for, you know, if you don't get along. And what happens is, you know, you're supposed to be able to summon the Emperor, and then you can talk to him, and then you can do take the mantle, and then I think put the mantle on the person you want to lead, and it glows or something. It's supposed to be the way you can indisputable like confirm that your ruler is the righteous one. The problem is Taldaris has been captured. He had ascended into like the plane of law and become this like immortal celestial being essentially, and he's been captured because not, you know, those planes all have their own like it's very much like Olympus, like the different planes, they all have various drama and their own evil entities to deal with. So instead, the players are teleported to the plane of law, which is called Axis in the Pathfinder universe, specifically into Taldaris' house, like his mansion. And in doing so, there's this crazy cutscene where they see all this weird shit, and then yeah, it's all detailed right here. There's a lot of like weird events happening, and they're all clues. It turns out they're all clues that the players can follow up on in part 2. So part 2 begins with them being transported to Taldaris' house. They're in the plane of law, and they have to figure out what the fuck is going on. They don't see him anymore. And, like, at some point, like, the sheriff shows up, which she's got a great picture. So I can pull that one up. And she, like, knocks on the door, and she's like, hey, what's going on in here? Who are you guys? Where's the person who's supposed to be here? Oh, shoot, did I do that right? Shift click. There we go. Fanalix? Lieutenant Fanalix, which is another great picture. I love Pathfinder's art. This is really cool. The Plane of Law, this whole area is just full of really, really fun characters and creatures, as you can imagine. One of them is this creepy-ass gnome who's the villain here. Which, another thing I like is that this module utilizes like real villains in almost each scenario, and then at the end of the module, any villains that escaped can reappear essentially at the final base headquarters, which is a really cool touch. But all these villains are not just randomly working their own. They all are working in concert, like on the same team, which is a neat concept. Look at this creepy thing, though. It's got like, it's a bookworm that was transformed into just a sentient pile of bookworms. It's fucking fantastic. Female gnome worm that walks druid. So there's a neat scenario here. This is a little tiny house, but it's nice that we got this map where there's a few things happening where they're trying to destroy the evidence of what this apparently just happened pretty recently, where they took over. They captured the emperor, and there's this big conspiracy trying to keep him under wraps. And the players have to discover what the hell happened to him. So part 2 is basically this whole gathering information, and yeah, you are in this city, wandering around trying to figure out where he is, which is a little bit of a repetition based on other modules. Almost every single module in this campaign has done that exact same thing in part 2, which is your players are in a city, you have multiple leads or things to explore, and then go nuts. That's pretty much how part 2 has gone for almost every single module in this campaign. This one does kind of do the same thing, but I really like it because it's a way more unique spin having it in this more exotic location and dealing with more exotic things. Like, and unfortunately, most of them are not. We don't have any pictures for them, so you kind of just have to use this city map, which is a good map. But there's not a lot of visual aids. The one we get is this one right here, where the biggest one is that you can run a political campaign against a Medusa, because there's a conspiracy against this one guy who was sent this threatening letter to step down, and this Medusa was going to take a spot. So they're obviously, that guy's thinking there's a conspiracy somewhere. It's actually, I think, optional to run the political campaign, but there's a lot of rules for it, which, if your characters are playing through this adventure path, hopefully at least one of them is really into it, because that's kind of a big part of this adventure path is the political machinations, a lot of the diplomacy rolls and skill checks, those persona phases they call them. So that's a big part of it, and it's nice to have that here, although it is pretty optional. Otherwise, there's just a lot of neat events your players can do as they follow those leads. And again, it's that like cutscene you get. I'm not going to read the whole thing. You saw those paragraphs, but they just saw various visions of things, so they can follow up on those and talk to that lieutenant that knocks on the door, and you can kind of confer with her about, okay, can we be, essentially deputized into following this investigation. You can have, let's see, because I wrote down a good little description here. You can have tea with like a 10,000-year-old angel of death, which is great. This guy, Quarit. I mentioned the political campaign against the Medusa. You can help an animated doll evade capture, and you can track down an intellect devourer who had been taking over the local post office, which uses void dragons as couriers. Those are all fantastic, thumbs up, really cool things happening all across this city. I love it. I love every bit of that. Mostly what you're going to end up doing is pretty optional, because essentially a scripted event happens, up to the DM, but probably after they've exhausted all these leads or the ones they want to do. And there's like kind of an earthquake that happens in the cemetery, and like half of it goes under, and then this bunch of monsters emerge. And they have to deal with that, and it's basically the villains kind of escalating because they're worried about the investigation. Like, oh shit, we got to come out and attack. Which ends up, of course, being a bad idea, because then the heroes can just follow that path down below where they need to go. But the nice thing is there is a, let's see, there's a table somewhere. I think it's actually under Fanalix's. Yeah, here we go. So basically, depending on how you did in each of these leads determines your support earned with Phenalix's investigation, and then that leads, a weak case 0 to 4 points, solid investigation 5 to 7 points. And I love it when campaigns do that. Give your players, enough rope to hang themselves or to get bonuses. And in this case, it's bonus XP, it's bonus information, and it's bonus like potions and wands and loot. So I like that not only is it from a role-playing standpoint, because you can't I was gonna say railroad. You cannot you need the players to get to that third act. So you have to figure out, okay, if the players just screw this up horribly, how can I still get them to Act 3? And I think the best thing is you just reward them for doing a good job rather than punishing them for doing a bad job, if that makes sense. So this is a nice way of, even if they do a really shitty job through everything, they can still find their way because of that event in the cemetery. They'll just have to end up like paying money to get people there to ferry them, and they're not going to get any of the bonuses. Whereas if they do really well during the investigation, all those little side quests, drinking tea with the, helping the animated doll, all those things, then it comes out where they can get all these extra goodies, which I really like that standpoint from gameplay and for a story prospect. So I can actually show the cemetery map. That is the one other map that we get. They're the third of fourth maps, I guess. So this is because it's a big battle map. It's not terribly complicated. It's just a big. That's kind of like the funeral home right there. Slash, that's not really a mausoleum, but there's grave sites everywhere, including like a sentient grave, which is nice. A whole lot of just really messed up creatures and animals, including this thing, which is some sort of swamp demon horse called a Catoblepus. I have no idea. This looks very much like a Ghostbusters scenario, though, where like literally just all those monstrous things are just coming to life and just look scary as shit. And then down below, it's the sewer blight, and then the villain is a Naga that has brought a fiendish Froghemoth to battle. So just a whole lot of big monster battles in this scenario, but the whole point is getting down here, and now you've got the path to where you need to go, which you find out is where Taldaris is being kept, which is Dusk Fathom, which is a cool name for the final area, which the kind of behind-the-scenes villains have been operating. And this is a really, really cool dungeon right here. Part 3 is basically just this dungeon crawl. So after your players have been kind of doing a bunch of role-playing stuff and skill checks, and maybe a few combat encounters with those various leads, then they have that big fight in the cemetery, which then leads them, I mean, they can rest, I guess, in between, but then they go down here into this final dungeon crawl, so it's a good balance mix right there. But this dungeon is fantastic. One of the first things you get to do is you actually rescue Wysilkia, which I think is the boss of the very first module, Crownfall, is this kind of messed up evil jester. And after her failure or death by the players, was sent here as punishment. Silka the Failed. So you can basically rescue her and team up with her, and she will kind of tell you about the different traps, hazards, and the fact that the main villain, which is the what's it called, some kind of shadow thing, can basically like loop around all over this dungeon and just fuck with the players, which is interesting because there's not, I mean, I guess there is a final boss fight, but that actual like the head villain, because his strength is literally just like zooming around the dungeon and just screwing with everybody the whole time, which is really nifty. Although it's also interesting that the villains don't necessarily work or help each other, so the players don't have to worry about like sounding any alarms or anything. They can just kind of go hard into this dungeon and really move room to room if they want to. But there's pretty neat stuff happening in here, aside from having all the various villains from before, the Intellect Devourer, the Naga. There's like a lawyer, a demon lawyer in here that can help the players out. There's these messed up, what do they call them? Kruzameks? Kazurumek? Karumzek. I never got that right. Okay, a little spider alchemist thing, which is really neat. There's a whole trap in here with a like sword construct demon thing with a bunch of spinning blades everywhere. There's this meat locker full of just creepy ass haunted humans just hanging in there. There's this weird like torture chamber specifically designed to fuck up the mechanical mind. It's got like all these math problems on the wall designed to just fuck up all the constructs from the above city. Oh yeah, this one's a great villain. What is this thing? Hamalkai, she is got all these eyeballs, and throughout the module, the players will see these little eyes floating around that can obviously is her spying on people, and she can use her eyes to like memory wipe all the other villains, so that if the players try to like talk to them, there's that classic like almost the sniper takes them out or something. This is like the fantasy version of that, which is pretty funny. Really messed up looking character too, just made up a bunch of eyeballs. Rescuing Taldaris is actually pretty straightforward, though. Literally just, he's in prison, chilling, and you have to rescue him. There's a warden and everything. Just actually pretty straightforward little rescue mission. And then there's a final fight between this, like, scorpion guy who can turn into a scorpion. The stabbing beast. There's another outsider, but he can shape change into this kind of giant scorpion, which looks like the Scorpion King, basically. And in fact, there's a let's see if I can find it. Nope, where is that? There it is. Ha! There's a handout that shows off that fight, which looks much cooler than the Rock Scorpion King version. This one just is a dude with like a scorpion tail. That might be him in like mid-transformation too. I'm not sure exactly how he works, but pretty neat for a final boss fight right there. And again, that shadow is just kind of going around fucking with everybody. So I really like the way that this dungeon comes together, and it has this really crazy cutscene at the end where you see the villains talking to each other, and they mention the fact that they assassinated Princess Eutropia, which is your person you've been working for this entire time throughout the entire campaign. And they say, "Oh, should we kill the kid too?" Which is the brother you rescued, I believe, in the third campaign module. And they said, "Oh no, we've got grand plans for that one." So it really like drops this big cool like truth bomb towards the end of it and makes your players go, "Oh shit, well we've been away, the bad guys have been doing things," which is always cool. So I'm really excited about this one. I think it just does a really fun job of putting the players in a totally like alien situation, but that still uses the themes of the campaign, which is urban environments and like political maneuverings and investigating mysteries. It does all that, but also includes a lot of really cool like monsters and just a really cool group of allies and enemies together, which is nifty. So let's go over the pros and cons real quick before I gush any more about the Reaper's Right Hand. Pro, we have a pair of excellent dungeon crawls that bookend the module. Again, pretty much all of part 1 and part 3 is just straight up dungeon crawl, and they are both really fantastic. Pro, as a diverse cast of otherworldly allies and villains. I've pretty much been talking about that the entire time. Just really neat characters throughout. Look at this one thing down here. These are like celestial guards of the city, and it is a like metallic centaur with wings and like whip blades for hands. What the fuck even is that? A Zellicut. That's fucking crazy. And a lot of these creatures are like that. It's just absolutely bananas. Either Gygaxian or whatever you want to even refer to these as, but it's really fucking cool. I really like the story for Pro. Dumps our PCs into a city in the plane of law where they must gather clues and follow leads. That's a really good twist on the formula that the campaign's been doing. And there are a delightful mix of fantastical creatures, from astral demons to mechanical angels to a bookworm gnome made up of actual worms. I love that. Cons, I do think part 2 is lacking a bit in the map, or at least player handout department. I wouldn't necessarily need maps for all those locations because a lot of them are just maybe one battle, if that. But at least having some kind of visual, nice artwork or something to go with that, like a scene or something, would have gone a long way. But as you can see, when I look at part 2 right here, not a whole lot of visuals at all. You get like that one scene of the Medusa politician, who apparently is a real estate agent, which I love that. But otherwise, there's not much going on here, which is a bummer. And for some reason, most of the magical items lack pictures, which is also just kind of random. Usually, I mean, there's just more pictures to go with them, but as you can see right here, a lot of them do not have pictures. Bit of a bummer on that. All right, so final verdict. The Reaper's Right Hand includes all of my favorite elements in a module. There are deadly dungeon crawls, interesting and quirky characters, and an intriguing mystery. So thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com, and you can follow our own D&D adventures right here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.